They want to be playing to what they see as their strengths on migration, on crime. And instead, there is a story today about internal fighting, the soap opera, as you call it, Gabriel, the kind of soap opera that ultimately derailed the Tories. And that's what they've got to watch here. We want to talk to you about Reform UK. Now, we have not seen Nigel Farage now since, I think, 3 a.m. on Friday, when he was on Farage Fest and he took to the stage and he kind of said this victory in the Clacton by-election sticks 2 fingers up at the establishment. And since then, he's gone quiet. We've seen a kind of extraordinary internal row in the party over Zia Yusuf, the party's Home Affairs spokesman, which seems to have culminated in Tim Montgomerie, who's a broadcaster, a former Tory and a supporter of Farage and Reform. He's been suspended for being possibly too much of a critical friend. Is that fair, Fraser?
It seems to be, and suspended as a party member. Now, it's one thing to sack a minister or a frontbencher for being critical of a leader. It's another thing to kick somebody out of your party because they went on television as a supporter saying, I'm not quite sure that Nigel Farage did the right thing in not giving a victory speech after Clacton, you know. So it seems a relatively small offence and a very strange precedent, but this is an unusual party. When Tim Montgomerie was signed as a member of Reform, that was enough for a sort of Farage press conference. It was a big deal. Tim Montgomerie's been an intellectual force behind conservatism, there's no doubt about that, the founder of ConservativeHome. And when he moved across, it was a prelude to Robert Jenrick moving across. He had a big hand in taking Jenrick across as well. So it seemed to be a kind of a shift in the right. Now, by the same token, his expulsion or suspension from the party is also quite a big event. And it seems to have come over Zia Yusuf. Now, Zia Yusuf, we know, basically loathes Robert Jenrick and vice versa. Zia was calling Jenrick a traitor before he joined Reform. But when Tim Montgomerie went public in saying, look, Zia Yusuf is becoming too divisive, and what Zia is doing in calling people traitors is galvanising the anti-reform tactical vote. It used to be said in politics, but it doesn't matter how much those who don't vote for you don't like you. In other words, let them hate us as much as they like. But that's not true if anti-reform becomes the number one force in a constituency. If you get Tories voting for Labour and vice versa, because their number one priority is that reform stays out. Now, Tim Montgomerie and many people like him thought that Zia Yusuf was doing exactly that he was coming up with this sort of vicious authoritarian language. I'm going to open a detention centre in the constituencies of people who don't vote for reform. I'm going to track down and boot out up to 2 million undocumented people in Britain. I'm going to bring a British ICE to the UK. Now, a lot of people thought this is just too much. It may galvanise the base, but it's going to make other people vote tactically against it. Tim Montgomerie voiced the concerns that many in Reform have got, and for that he seems to have lost his privileges as a Reform member.
It's also just these inherent tension within Reform. I mean, one of the points that Zia Yusuf made before Robert Jenrick's defection, he didn't want any more Tories. He wanted them to be their own thing. So you've since obviously had Robert Jenrick, Suella Braverman, lots of different Tories joining. And so unsurprisingly, they're not particularly happy bedfellows.
That's right. I mean, I think what's so interesting about this is we don't yet know exactly why this has happened. So let's be clear that party leaders routinely use the machinery of their party bureaucracy to display their own political direction. Alistair Campbell was suspended under Corbyn's Labour. Corbyn was suspended under Starmer's. Kemi Badenoch at the moment has drawn some criticism for forestalling the parliamentary selection of some former Tory cabinet members. So it is normal for party leaders to exercise their discretion and use the party rulebook to do certain things and promote or demote certain individuals. But the question here is, what is actually going on? Is this merely a kind of tactical response to Montgomerie's it's not that he's been insubordinate per se, he's just been really candid. He's tweeted and now spoken on The Spectator with a degree of honesty about what he perceives to be the problem with the party and in particular Zia's pronouncements. Or in time, will it emerge that Farage is using this to convey that he's in the same intellectual position as Zia, that he doesn't want to unite the right, that he objects to this notion that in some way or another, informally or otherwise, the constituent parts of the British right will need to unite in order to prevent progressive domination at the next election. I mean, that's kind of the massive electoral question, the kind of tectonic plate on which this latest soap opera sits. And I would say as well, there's just a massive question as to what Zia's long game over here, because if you woke up every day wanting to succeed Nigel Farage, you would probably say things and act in a way that is consistent with Zia Yusuf of late. I mean, everything he says is catnip to the kind of die-hard reform base, but it is not necessarily the path you would chart if your objective was, as you say, Fraser, firstly, making reform a more benign and palatable proposition for people who are swing voters, or who you might say we just rather they were quiescent come the next election. As long as they're not going out to vote against us, that would be good. Also, it's not as straightforward as just the Tory defectors are arraying themselves against Zia Yusuf. There are a lot of people who have known Farage for a long time who have long had an issue with his own conduct and performance. I know on very good authority a man who's now no stranger to our readers, George Cottrell, kind of one of the few Farage whisperers who's been there throughout the last decade, has major issues with Yusuf, and for a long time felt that he was detracting from Farage's operation. So this man at the moment in his fate, Yusuf, is once again of the essence, really. It's fascinating. And it's not exactly clear where Farage lies on it either.
It comes down to a bandwidth issue, right? Farage wants, and Reform surely want to be doing what Robert Jenrick did yesterday. They want to do press conferences where they're talking about stripping foreigners of welfare. They want to be playing to what they see as their strengths on migration, on crime. And instead, there was a story today about internal fighting, the soap opera, as you call it, Gabriel, the kind of soap opera that ultimately derailed the Tories. And that's what they've got to watch here, that there is going to be a need to assert some kind of discipline, because if they don't and the fighting continues, then that becomes the story. And we haven't even got to, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but Insight's work on Reform's finances and all the distraction from their core message that presents. But that's the issue here, isn't it? It's probably not the ground they want to be talking on.
And also, it was never clear if Zia Yusuf is controllable, as it were. He's got his own people, he's got his own team. He will, launch a policy in the morning and then pick a fight with somebody on Twitter in the afternoon. And his sort of side hustle, as it were, can create more fuss than the original policy. He seems to enjoy conflict quite a lot. And by the way, he's also defied Nigel Farage. Farage was saying time and time again, no, we cannot have mass deportation. It's impractical. We can't kick out every single legal immigrant, man, woman and child. It's just not politically workable. And then Zia Yusuf seems to have won the argument, saying, no, that's exactly what we are going to do. It was never clear to me how they were reconciled. But when he resigned, I mean, Zia Yusuf is quite a flouncer outer. He resigned as party chairman. He's resigned as head of the Doge unit. The first time he resigned, Nigel Farage did everything he could to bring him back. He was really saying, look, we need you as a party, come back. I think he recognises that his strengths is he is a very good media performer. But this is also a question as to how they handle Restore. Restore is the great phantom at the Reform feast right now, because it's got exactly the same playbook. We want to be the baddest guys in town. We're going to appeal to you. We're going to be an even bigger vote of protest than Reform is. And Zia Yusuf has been saying, look, we can't allow them that advantage. So we need to be saying shock and awe things that do not give Rupert Lowe that kind of edge. Nigel Farage hasn't been so clear about that. So this is another point of differentiation. How do Reform respond to Restore? Zia Yusuf's answer has been to be right out there of the traps, setting off explosions left, right and centre, denying Restore oxygen. Farage hasn't been so sure about this. So now we see a situation where Farage's popularity is falling quite a lot. His approval rating is now down there with Zach Polanski, where Kemi Badenoch is just above water on 0.3, Andy Burnham was on 0.6 and 7, Farage is minus 23. But this isn't a great place. And if you were to go, I mean, I don't think you will, but if you were, then Lord Ashcroft polling says Zia Yusuf's number 1 to succeed him, and then maybe Richard Tice number 2 and Jenrick number 3. But you wonder how much of Zia Yusuf's activity is directed at the Reform base rather than the Reform target voters.
Can I get just one thing that I know you've done, Fraser, because obviously there is a degree to which the version that Zia presents on social media is slightly a caricature, the traitor language. It's a hard line, kind of picking fights with people, that kind of thing. You've sat down and debated with him. And that is a very different Zia that I saw during that debate, unless I've misread it.
No, yeah, absolutely. I found him thoughtful. I was chatting to him after it as well, quite sociable.
It was a measured debate, wasn't it? You were debating...
we were debating, is Britain broken? The kind of classic kind of fault line between the Conservatives and Reform right now. And, I agreed with them on a whole bunch of things. But what was interesting was that when I was there in person with him, he was friendly, chatty, saying, yes, I think you might have exaggerated this, but I think we agree on that. The kind of language which you don't do for online. Now, the thing is, Steve, you'll know, all of us know, but there are politicians whose online persona is very different to what they are in person. And I think Zia is like that. I think he's a man of exceptional ability, exceptional energy. And I think he's right in a whole bunch of things that he says. But he's also probably thinking that nowadays you need to create a reaction. You need to be creating a fire left, right, and centre if you want to keep the kind of narrative behind you.